It's easier for people to look up.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just that's where I started with Freaky Friday.
Right.
Hi everyone, welcome to
There he is.
Bookshop, and thank you for coming.
There's my husband.
Welcome. So we're here with Nicola Harrison and Hach Hearne, and we're celebrating the trouble with drowning. So congratulations to you two. So we're going to do a conversation between the two of them, followed by audience Q&A if any of you have any questions, and then a book signing. So here, go ahead. Yay!
Yeah.
Yay.
Well, thank you. This is so much fun. It's always like this blast from my past to see everybody and to have you here.
I'm so close to you. I'm going to scooch.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
There we go.
And we can try to brush my teeth before we...
Well, congratulations on this book. It's fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
I love it.
Thank you.
And you're doing some great events and everything. But tell everybody a little bit about what this book is about and what inspired you to write it.
Well, this book is a psychological thriller that I wrote during COVID because I was reading a ton of psychological thrillers during COVID just because I needed an escape from the world. Felt like the wheels were falling off the bus, and they still feel like they're falling off the bus. This is why we need books more than ever. It was my escape hatch. And I found psychological thrillers in particular just really compulsively readable and fun to take me away. And I'll tell you what it's about before I tell you a little. It's about a very troubled character, Kat Lamb. She is very complicated. A recent MFA grad from University of Arizona on scholarship, and she's writing about her childhood, a memoir about her childhood in the foster system. She falls madly in love for the very first time with Jacob, and Jacob's mother is a force of nature, and she's also a professor of English and a writer herself at the University of Arizona. So anyway, she is just head over heels for the first time. And when it falls apart, so does she. And when she falls apart, he starts dating someone new. And this is the nightmare you do not want your ex to start dating. Basically, that's who this is. And so she wants to not only kind of push her off her pedestal, but replace the new girl completely. So that is the basic premise of The Trouble with Drowning. And she's troubled. Yes, she's complicated. But she was really fun to write. And I love all these characters so much. And once I started, I realized I had this idea from about 30 years ago that I just kind of had figured out slightly.
Oh, interesting. So it was something that had been kind of back there for a while.
When I was a student at the University of Arizona, and I transferred, I transferred to Colorado. Arizona wasn't the best fit for me, but I did love the town of Tucson where it's set. I thought Tucson was such an interesting place and such a fascinating city and a really authentic, unusual vibe. It's like a kooky neighbor or something, Tucson. And I felt like it was a really good place to set this, and also a good reflection of Kat and her duplicity, the beauty and the madness.
So did you have these characters bouncing around in your mind for a while, or was it more of like the setting, like you knew you wanted to set a book that both? Oh,
both.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And it's loosely based on someone I dated at Arizona. I did meet the Jacob, Chris, who was the older brother of my friend who did run track at Arizona. But Chris is like now in prison, which is true. So
in a slightly different direction then.
Yeah, things didn't go so hot for Chris. But his mother was a professor at the University of Arizona, and this really fabulous woman. And I liked the family almost more than I liked him.
Okay.
He had a brother who played jazz bass with Sting, and the other sister is now married to Steve Kerr, the head coach of. He played for the Bulls, and so they were all just these dynamic, fantastic people. But Chris kind of never had his thing in the family.
Yeah,
and I thought that was interesting dynamic of what happens when you're in this whole family of superstars.
Right.
And everyone shines so bright. And
what I thought you did a fabulous job of in this book was really getting into the heads of these various characters and allowing the reader to to really have the perspective of Kat, of Jacob, of the mother, Carol, and even of the new girlfriend. And I thought that was just masterfully done.
Thank you.
And I wondered, was that always your intention to write from, give their perspectives, or did you think you were going to start off like maybe in just the main character, like Kat, and just tell it from her, or like did that change or shift?
I just didn't want to spend all my time in Kat's head.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah, that would be, that would be
yeah,
tough.
I just kind of wanted to, that's what I love about reading myself, is I love going into multiple perspectives and people's headspace. I love a chapter that's from one person's perspective and another, and the Gone Girl of it all. So I tried to emulate some of that, whether it wasn't as strategic as much as I just wanted to write with figuring out a little bit more of each character.
And did you write, like your writing process, did it just like what you felt should come next? Like you finished writing from Kat's perspective, then you start switching to Jacob. Did you plan out like, okay, I'm going to write?
Not really.
No,
It just was more organic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I read on Stephen King's On Writing, and that was one of my big books that I really helped form this book.
Right.
And I was so relieved to hear that he doesn't outline very much. I was like, me too. I'm lazy and I love it. So let's just write. But yeah, he said that like with Misery, he said Paul was supposed to die. And he's like, Paul was just much more resourceful than I had in mind. And I love that. That's what I like to do. I like to know where I'm going. I like to kind of know where I'm ending up. But then my characters take me on a ride. And that's when my writing is more original and true. When I outline too much, it just doesn't, there's nothing there for me to figure out. And in the outline form, I don't know if you're the same, but I can't hear them. I can't feel them.
Yeah.
You know, it's just things that happen to them.
Right.
But I've got to hear them talk to me and hear them in my head and hear their rhythms and just let them.
That's also why I hate writing a synopsis of a book.
Right.
I hate that like the publisher wants a synopsis of the book. I'm like, you're going to hate what it sounds like until I'm able to just write the book.
Right.
Wait for the book. Wait for me to finish the book. You don't need a synopsis.
Right. It's not, it takes the spontaneity out of figuring out who these people are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this book, you tackle the subject of mental health. And I thought you did a great job with that. The character certainly goes off the deep end, literally and figuratively. Certain parts.
Title is the title for a reason, yes.
And so what kind of research did you have to do to, you know, make this viable, and what the choices, because there's a lot of twists and turns and everything too. So like, what did you have to do for that?
Yeah, I looked up, I kind of knew what I wanted some of her behavior to be. And I sort of walked backwards, and you know, it's very tricky too, because I don't want to say that everyone who has a mental, you know, health issue, and God knows everyone has mental health issues. I have my own. I've struggled with OCD and picking my hair compulsively. It's called trichotillomania, and it's fantastic. And
said something, right?
Yeah, but I don't want to portray that everyone who suffers from different diagnoses is going to do anything. But I'm also advocating for sticking with your medication and working with professionals and not taking over the steering wheel, which is what Kat does, and when she gets into trouble.
Yeah.
So I found a diagnosis that was pretty lined up with kind of some of the behavior that you might see toward the end of the book.
Yeah. Okay. Question about your background. So you wrote the screenplay for Freaky Friday, and you wrote the musical for Legally Blonde. So how did that type of writing influence or impact writing a novel, and how is it different? How did it help? How is it different?
Yeah, it's, you know, ultimately a story is a story, and you're just leaning into the medium that you're given with. And I write, you know, it's all about the economy of words for a screenplay, and about the movement, and about trying to create a movie in the reader's mind who is reading, you know, your screenplay, and the rat-tat-tat. There's a rhythm to screenwriting. And I love getting a chance to really breathe with a novel and get into kind of the more interior world, and not just, you know, moving scene to scene. And I had a big problem of telling, not showing, because that's you tell what's going on in a screenplay, and you show more with a novel. And I kept making that mistake over and over. My editor's like, "You're doing it again. You're doing it again. You're doing it again." So I definitely lean. But then with like the stage, it's the same thing. It's really a musical's got to move, and I also wanted I love writing that has a musicality to it, that has its own rhythm, that kind of special sauce that you can feel, and I try to kind of infuse it with a bit of musicality. I love music, and there's a lot of musical references in the book. But it was just really fun to delve into their minds and spend more time with the characters.
Yeah.
I found it, frankly, more fun to write the novel.
Okay, interesting. Because I was thinking about that as I was reading the book, and it's a page turner. You're like, what's going to happen next? What's she going to do next? Like, how is she going to dig herself in deeper? And so I was thinking about your background and thinking that's probably part of what makes it so readable and so compulsively readable.
Hopefully the pacing is, and it feels cinematic. That a lot of people say it felt like a movie.
Yes,
a little bit.
Definitely. Well, did you have like a cast of characters in your mind?
I love casting conversations.
Yes.
So let's spend a lot of I saw Anya Taylor-Joy from The Queen's Gambit as Kat.
Oh, wow. That's really good.
She's kind of alienly beautiful and intelligent and interesting. I just kind of saw her. For Jacob, I didn't have anyone, but recently I've been seeing all these trailers for Priscilla. So I think that Jacob Elruddy, who plays Elvis, looks great.
Sure.
We can cast him.
Yeah.
And then I see Taylor Swift as Eden.
Wow. I love it.
Or like Lake Lively, 10 years ago.
Yes.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But she's a little older than Jacob, so she could be 30.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
So I love to see people in my head and hear them, hear them.
That's fun. Okay, so in this book, there's also a lot about publishing, the publishing world, and the agony of waiting to hear back from.
Well, that's just being in the creative industry.
Yes,
I always say that writing is half of it, and the other half is just like being miserable and trying to stay sane in this crazy industry.
Yeah.
Like I honestly find the writing is the fun part. The hard part is dealing with everyone else.
Yeah.
The problem with people is people, but it's all a rough industry.
Yeah.
And putting your heart out there when you create something, it's hard.
So is that what you were kind of tapping into, the whole just being a creative, putting your work out there?
Yeah. And having other people be in charge of your future.
Right.
That's just that's such a hard thing to deal with. You create something and it's up to the whim of whether someone's in a bad mood, just got in an argument with their husband, and they have to sit down and read your work that you've spent 2 years of your life on. And it's like, I'm at it, I mean, that can happen.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to, be subject to. What I loved about writing this novel is there weren't any notes other than my editor that I hired myself. But it was just so much, it was my work.
Yeah.
It was just me. I didn't have people looking over my shoulder, and I love that kind of autonomy, and it was so satisfying.
Yeah. I loved the character of Carol.
Thank you.
The mother.
Me
I thought
too.
she was
Connie Britton.
I thought she was amazing. And
Thank you.
I was curious, who is your favorite character to write?
For different reasons. Kat, probably. Carol was really fun.
Yeah.
Carol was probably up there. And she was like my ex's mom. Was just this wonderful carousel of a lady. Was just, I just loved being in her presence. So, but Kat it's really interesting. It's a lot darker. Everything else I've done has been really pretty upbeat and happy. This is a lot darker, but I was going through something darker. I think we all were. And I leaned into a lot of my darker impulses and thoughts and worries. And it was fun. I'm like, my therapist told me last week, he's like, everything we talk about is in this book. And it's been since I've almost been processing it, doing all these interviews, of realizing all these things that I didn't even know I was processing.
Right.
Which is how writers still figure out the world, as we create.
Absolutely.
You know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like writing is genuinely more authentic when it's, even if it's fiction. Like, and for me, it's like historical fiction. So it's like, but it feels more authentic when you're putting yourself into those characters and you're putting yourself onto the page.
And you work through it. Like, people say, oh, do you read self-help? I'm like, yes, I read fiction.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It helps me way more than reading about what I need to do. And
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, what's your writing process like? Do you set a goal for yourself, like a certain amount of words a day, or do you?
Right now I feel like I'm in such a deficit because I'm still working on the I'm trying to kind of work on my new book, but and I have a very small window. I'm not a morning person, nor am I a night person. I'm sort of a sleeper. So I have, like, honestly, if I could get 2 to 3 hours between like 9, 10 in that window, if I can really rock it out for that period, that's good.
Yeah.
I don't have much more to give. It's exhausting, and it's weird. It's like travel. Like, why is sitting in a tube in the sky exhausting? And the same thing with writing. Like, all I did is, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
You know, but that's,
it takes a lot of brain power and mental and thinking and
and it's not all just writing. I mean, I always say writing is also walking my dog. It's laying in bed. I love laying in bed thinking. And my husband is so awesome that he let me lay in bed and during COVID and not get up. And I could work on that little twilight of consciousness and unconsciousness that I really figure out a lot of my stuff and my character, and I love it. I'm not awake, I'm not asleep, but I'm in that great dream zone. I love dreams. And so he's like, I'll get the kids ready for Zoom, you work. So the message is, if you can marry someone who knows that laying in bed is working, marry them.
That's a good point, actually. I remember in my very first podcast with Zibby Owens, the owner of this bookstore, she asked me, what do you do when you're like stuck with your book?
Yeah.
And you can't figure out what to do next. And I said, I take a nap.
Yeah.
She was like, what? What do you mean take a nap? How does that fix anything?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm telling you, when I wake up from the nap, I usually have the answer to what that character should do or what the plot point should be. So I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, it taps you into a kind of just a more primal, unconscious state.
Yeah, when you're staring at the screen trying to figure it out, you're not going to figure it out there. You're going to figure it out when you're walking the dog or falling asleep.
Right.
So I know you're in promotional mode right now. You're doing events, talking about the book. But I also know that you're starting to think about working on something new.
Well, I've written like 140 pages.
Okay, so you're
in a new book.
So is it a secret, or can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
All about it. It's called Relationship Goals. It's more of a comedy, this one. I've always wanted to write about my parents have a very ideal, perfect marriage. No marriage is perfect, but it's pretty damn perfect. And my brother and sister and I always say that we've been emotionally damaged by my parents' glorious marriage. And so I thought it'd be great to have a couple. They're having their like 30th or 40th wedding anniversary. He's retiring. They're going to Kona Village in Hawaii to celebrate and renew their vows. And they're bringing their kids and grandkids, and they're going to have this big party. And they're at the resort. The happiest couple on the planet arrives, and everyone starts getting totally obsessed with the perfect couple, and think Martin Short, Jennifer Coolidge, and they're a composing team. And so I think that's just a really fun, but it's all about, a big theme in this book too is also about comparing yourself and always looking over the fence, and whether online or in life, just constantly looking around and saying, what am I doing wrong? And they've got it figured out and I don't. And I just think that's really corrosive as culturally, and we're so entrenched in it right now with all the comparisons online and in life. And I do it too. But it's so easy to think someone else has it all figured out and you're a mess and everyone else is great, but it's not true.
Yeah. It's so hard to get away from that too, with all the social media and everything.
Yeah. And this culture is just completely dependent on telling you what you're doing wrong, especially if you're a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, everything. That's why I was dry heaving in tears and Barbie. I couldn't even open my eyes because it was like, that's exactly right. It's just impossible. We can't do this right. Whatever you do, you got to do it better. You got to sleep better, eat better, drink the right water, meditate right. You know, is your dog a goddamn breed? You horrible human being. You know, it's just like there's just endless of things you have to do right.
Yeah. Okay, so for any aspiring writers out there, what advice do you have for writing a novel?
Well,
for writing,
you can do it. Really, if you write a page a day, you're going to have a 365-page book at the end of the year. You know, sometimes when you look at the big picture, it's just impossible. But you write one page a day. That's really all you need to do. I also think reading compulsively and making it part of your life and part of your day. I don't look at it as just, oh, I'm relaxing in a chair, even though I am. I'm working. To be a good writer, I have to read a lot and be inspired and read things that make me excited to want to write. I think reading is one of the most important things. Also, just I think being a writer, one of the things I always say that I love about being a writer, I love so many things about being a writer, but it makes everything interesting potentially in life. You can be stuck at the DMV, and if you're a writer and you're just wanting to observe and study people and listen to conversations, and everything is interesting. And I think that really helps me just be engaged in life and be inspired.
Yeah.
And I find comedy I love comedy when it just comes out of real life. Like in Target the other day, these couple walked by. She's like, I think I would really benefit if I owned a building. And I was like,
I know, yes.
Me too. I mean, it's just,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always an opportunity.
Yeah.
Grocery shopping.
We all just need buildings.
Yeah.
So go get a building.
Yes. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I don't know. And I think having a group of friends too that you can talk about books, that really helps me. Most of my friends are big readers. And that's my big advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's open it up to questions. I'm sure you all have some. Someone has one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, superficial question, but I'm dying to know if the family that lightly inspired the story recognized themselves and had anything to say.
Oh,
not yet.
Oh my gosh.
And maybe never. I mean, Margot is the one married. She's been liking so I'm like, oh, she's like, can't wait to read it. And I'm like, oh, I did tell her it's set in Tucson, but I mean it as a total love letter. I mean, everyone other than even Chris comes off pretty well. Jacob's way better than Chris. So there's nothing terrible.
Yeah.
Right.
But I am kind of anxious and nervous about it. Yeah. We'll see. Yes.
It's interesting when you talk about that. Yeah, said two things I was going to say. Setting in Tucson made me want to move there. The way you describe Arizona,
Yeah.
it's just like so gorgeous, and it's just so interesting and okay. I read it, but maybe some people haven't.
Especially that house. I wanted to move into that house.
Right.
But also, I was really so intrigued by how much I identified and understood Kat, and I just thought that was so interesting for all her real challenges. I thought, oh, I felt like that. Oh,
right.
I thought that was just so fantastic.
Thank you.
She's like the way she goes, and it's maybe a extreme, but it's sort of like, oh, it's totally human. So I just thought you talked a little bit about it, but that's understanding mental health or just understanding, I think, just regular what motivates people and how people think, and so it didn't seem way off from me,
Good.
my own personal feelings. I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that, because I didn't want her to be a cartoon. I wanted her, I mean, obsession is really something I'm really interested in too. Like I mentioned, I've battled with obsessive compulsive disorder, and obsession is like such a great topic, and it's whether it's the single white female or fatal attraction, it's always through this kind of scary lens. But it took a lot of obsession for me to write this book, and it takes a lot of obsession to raise a child right. And I just think that obsession is also like hilarious topic in a lot of comedies, whether you're obsessed with dog breeds and Best in Show, or it's just obsession is an interesting topic because it often is cast as so negative. But what do you do with it when you really are obsessed with something? And it doesn't have to be the most negative force either, But Tucson is a beautiful, beautiful, interesting city, and I recommend going there because it does represent the duality that's at the core of the book. It's a very specific place of such beauty, but it's harsh and scary, and I think that's what it is. And she's such a mess because she loves so much and she wanted this beautiful thing so much. I think we all can relate to that. And feeling powerless over someone that doesn't share your feelings. So, yes?
I have a bit of a two-parter.
Uh-huh.
One, I love the title of this book.
Thank you.
I know that was always the title. And then the second question is, if you can reimagine this book in another genre, what would it be? Because I know a lot of times writing the book, it may start off as romantic comedy, contemporary romance, something, and then it changes. If you can reimagine it in a different genre, what would it be?
Good question.
Really good question. Okay, I can talk about the title while I think about the other. It was originally called I Am You, which is still a title I really like. I also like that it was 1, 2, 3. I could see it on a cover. But it was very similar to a lot of different titles that are you, I'll be you. People that didn't want to get lost in the shuffle. So, and then I paid someone to come up with other titles, and they were dreadful. One was Nothing Blooms in the Desert. Yeah. And so I just didn't know what to do. And I just kept writing kind of the themes, and I felt like drowning plays a big role in the piece, and I'm not going to say more. But also, which is so metaphorical for, Kat is drowning in her life. She's drowning in her mental health. And I think we all feel like we're drowning in different sections of our life. But when I wrote it down, I was like, that's a book I'd want to read. Like, I just loved the way it sounded and had a flow and it had a certain whatever that is. Oh, if I could reimagine it as another, I don't know what it would.
Musical.
Musical. 5, 6, 7. You're not well, neither am I. Let's get together. Musical. I mean, there is a reason I have the pug is named Don Lockwood for Singing in the Rain, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And I did want to name a pug Don Lockwood. I thought it'd be hilarious if you're like, what's your pug's name? Like, Don Lockwood. And people would be like, even people who would know, I'd be my instant friend. But then I didn't really want a Don in the house anymore. So I named a pug so I got it in the book. So it's almost like it happened. Yeah. Musical. Musical. Yeah. Yes?
I also have 2 questions.
Yes.
What was it like going from writing like other people's like characters to your own? And then you wrote like a letter to your readers. What inspired you to do that? Because like not most writers are like very grateful for their readers.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm very grateful for my readers.
I'm grateful for my readers too.
Yeah,
Just wanna put it out there.
We, without someone out there in the dark reading your work. That's what we do it for, is to hear from people that moved you, or, it's such a strange thing to love something and put it out for readers. And if it wasn't for them, there'd be no point to this. The letter, I had a sensitivity reader read my book to give me notes about certain things. I didn't want to trigger anybody. I didn't want people to be upset or feel like I was not being sensitive about this, tricky subject matter. So they did point out some things that I did change. I definitely changed Carol's motivation for kind of wanting to help was more selfish, honestly. She initially was trying to help Kat from a more selfish vantage point. But I tempered that a bit through the sensitivity reader. And I didn't know what to do. They really wanted me to put a disclaimer, just a trigger warning at this beginning. And I have sort of a complicated reaction to trigger warnings sometimes. I feel like they just by saying trigger warning, it triggers people. That's the whole thing. And so I went into Pages. I live in Manhattan Beach, our bookstore there, and I was telling them about this. And they said, well, look what this author just did. And I read it, and it was a YA novel, and I don't even know whose it was, but they wrote a letter to their, and I thought, that's what I want to do. That's a much more human, connective way of expressing, what I wanted to express. So, and the question you had about writing someone else's character. Yeah, because I do a lot of adaptations. Like, that's kind of always been a bit of my wheelhouse, is taking existing material and spinning it. I guess you have to kind of treat it like, once it becomes yours, you have to honor the material and honor who the character is that exists prior, but then you have to kind of let it go and make it your own, and not get too tied to someone else's version, because it's hard enough to do on your own. So I really try to make a conscious shift to just making it, this is my own character now. And it exists in this form that I need to honor. And like, for example, when I did Legally Blonde in Elle Woods, I can't, now I'm going to make her raising horses. You have to honor what existed prior.
Right.
But how do you strengthen it? How do you deepen it and build upon what already exists? Good question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've not read it yet, and I'm sure I will love it.
Thank you.
But
I sure hope so.
I'm sure I will. But I'm just curious if you've had any pushback. Have you had any negative responses from anybody? Has anyone been triggered or?
No, mostly the opposite, actually. People have, I've had some people, reviewers I don't know, said that they suffer from the same, disorder, and said it was very cathartic. The only negative I've gotten is people felt that it hops around perspectives too much, and I like that.
Well,
and
I like that. That's what one of the things I really liked about it.
So, not every book is going to be for everybody. So, but I just think if you don't finish a book, you probably shouldn't review it.
I know.
Those people. I want to talk to the manager.
Yeah.
1 star. But most people have been really terrific, and I've been really heartened because I was nervous. Yeah, I think the letter gets away with, I'm giving people an exit if they don't want to read about that subject. So.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you find that when you're writing your characters, you have to slip into the character in order to become what you're writing, or is it just one of those that I don't know exactly how you
Asks her husband.
Wow.
He's very worried right now.
I know.
He's concerned.
What do you really? What's the question behind the question? How crazy? How loose of a cannon is my wife? I don't know. I mean, I definitely go into a zone. I'm sure you probably do too. Or I do slip into this. It's a mystery to me. Like I hear voices in my head. Like that sounds kind of nuts, right? But that's part of what you do as a writer, is you hear people talk to you, and I just give them a little place to live. But you have to slip into the character. Yeah, and when I would get into the cat manic stuff, I mean, I remember once I'd written until 4 and I hadn't even looked up, and I hadn't eaten lunch, and I don't miss lunch. I was like, wait, whoa, where did I go? I was definitely in the zone. And I love when you're in the zone.
Oh, yeah.
And you just feel like you're just picking out, it just comes. And then there's days it's just the complete opposite, where I should just be selling dog leashes to someone and pointing out, here's a great dog bed for you.
I mean, I remember before publishing a book, I would hear authors say, oh yeah, my characters take on a life of their own. And I was like,
really?
Do they though, really? Because you're the one pulling the strings,
Right.
But then when you write your own book and you get into it, then they do. These characters, they do things. Sometimes I'm typing and I'm like, no, don't do it. Like, this is a very bad idea. But like, sometimes they do things that you don't even expect them to do.
Right.
Or characters will come in who you think are going to have a very small role.
Totally.
And then they stay and they become a main character.
You like them.
You like them.
Yeah. And they talk more.
Yes.
They need more airspace.
And I think when that starts to happen, you're onto something good, because these characters are taking over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's fun.
We had another question over there.
Yes.
So this is your second novel.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference between like your first one that you wrote, which is more of a continuation or an adaptation, compared to coming up with something completely new? Like, what was that process for you? Because you spoke about like kind of like the writing process. Was it very different did it take you a long time to think about it? Did you it's such a different process between like building on something to coming up with something completely original?
Yeah, I wrote a YA novel about 15 years ago called Freaky Monday with Mary Rogers, who wrote Freaky Friday, the book. And she didn't do anything. I wrote everything. And it's a teacher and a student who switch places. And that's the premise that they gave me. And, that was, obviously I didn't feel as emotionally connected at all to that book. I wanted to have a book. It was always a life goal of mine. It was like I had this opportunity and I decided I'm going to do it. But I felt it was more of a job, to be quite honest. And I was just, I don't even remember the process being that challenging or that, satisfying. This book is a lot more me, for better or worse. Probably for worse. But it was my creation. It was my baby, and there's just something very personal about, and about my struggles. I'm not a teacher in the other one. I just had to kind of get it out. It's about personal connection to the characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Writing is terrifying. How did you, and because you didn't have an outline.
I kind of did.
Okay.
I knew where I was going.
You knew where you were going. Okay,
Yeah.
That might help this next question. But what gave you, so the blank page is obviously the most terrifying beginning part. How did you get the courage to start? How did you get the courage to start?
It wasn't really courage. It was just sort of, well, this is going to help, Yeah. And I knew the minute I started writing, which was really interesting. I was just in Colorado for some readings where I'm from. And my mom had one of my first drafts on the counter. And I was like, oh my God, it was so different. Yeah. I just kind of almost forgot. Yeah. But I still felt very I just felt like this is what I need. It still felt connective and right.
Yeah.
And that's often what you're looking for, is that magic, but you're trying to find a connection with people, trying to find a connection with the book, trying to find a connection with what you're writing. It's when does it feel right and good in your bones? And it did immediately. And yeah.
Well, I was going to ask. So you said your mom had this first draft. So who do you let read your writing, and do you let them read it along the way, or do you have to have a completed manuscript before you let anyone read it?
I have a few friends that I let read. Two good friends that are big readers, and they help me a lot. And then the editor, really. So I didn't have that many people, to be honest. And I'm surprised I sent it to my mom. It was kind of a strange choice. I had all these edits all over it. I'm like, why would she want to read this?
I don't know. I feel like at some point in the writing process, maybe when you've finished a first draft, you're kind of like desperate for some kind of feedback. Like, is this any good?
Yeah.
Does this totally suck?
And then you can get into the headspace of where I'll read something over and I'll be like, wait till the world hears this joke. Whoa. And then I've like an hour later, we'll read it and be like, oh my God. And it's like, I don't know what's true anymore. Like you worked so hard and you thought about it so much.
You're so close to it.
That you don't trust yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take you?
I keep saying 9 months, and I don't know if that's like some unconscious choice, but probably. I think it was around that. I mean, it took a lot longer to edit, to, polish, to the whole process. But it felt like from when I started writing to about that. I mean, it just became my life too. And I, we weren't doing anything. So, I mean, on the weekends, I just wanted to write.
So what did that moment look like right before you wrote the first opening sentences? Like, were you doing dishes and you're like you've been kind of telling the story in your head for a couple days, and you're and all of a sudden you're like, I'm just gonna go turn my computer and get this one out.
Yeah.
What does that look like for a writer?
I don't know. I mean, the first line that I wrote is their first date had been entirely unremarkable, or something like that. And I was like, well, that's not a very fun start. An unremarkable date is going to bring people in.
But read more.
but it was interesting, and I don't know why that in particular was the line. But when I started writing, it felt good. I could feel it. Yeah.
All right. Well, Heather's going to be signing books, so you can buy them up here.
And I've got tote bags with The Trouble with Drowning on them for everybody. But thank you. This is so wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. This is so great. Thank you for coming. I know. Isn't it gorgeous? Yeah. Hi. How are you? Don't worry.